One of these days, Diana, and I'm just going to start this meeting up early, and that way everybody that shows up late will be like, shucks, we don't have that 5 minutes. Hey there, Jory.
Hello. Did anyone go to KubeCon? Did anyone go to London?
Mike did, Sam did. Akihiro and Phil did.
That's awesome. I just had a little bit of FOMO, to be honest.
Who's asking about the parallel blobs today?
It's me.
Okay. I might end up bumping your stuff up earlier in case some of these other things end up running us to the end. I don't want to have you chopped off just by a bunch of the filler stuff here.
Thank you.
All right, we're a couple minutes after. Folks are trickling in, but I figure we can go ahead and kick this thing off. Let's see. I can share a screen. Let's do this. And even shared the right screen. Huzzah. So on the agenda, let's see. Jory, do we have any updates on the CFP, how we're looking at for submissions?
Um, Submissions are looking pretty good. We do have 3 more days technically for submissions to be accepted. We've got some LinkedIn posts and social posts that have gone out to hopefully promote from the OCI community as well as from like the LF at large. But obviously, really appreciate y'all's sharing too of the deadline and the CFP call that went out in a newsletter yesterday as well, or Tuesday. I don't know what day it would, so it's Thursday already. I don't know what date it is.
It's all a
So yeah, hope
blur.
it's all a blur. So we will hopefully have some great things to review together.
Okay. So no need to send out a panic of, hey, we need someone to volunteer to fly to Europe right now. If
Yeah,
they're
no, no, no,
okay.
no, no panic purchases of air travel, please.
Okay. Very good. Let's see. Going down the list here, we had a request to fix the upload. Let's see the badge trigger one here. And I think Tina and I were back and forth on whether it should be everything or nothing. And they got tired of waiting and just closed it out on us. So I just want to check in on this one. Do we want to try to fix the badge at all? Or leave it as is? Do we want to agree on how this should look one way or another?
I think the badge by itself is not a very interesting problem to solve. And I still think we should just delete the badge. But the CI, I think, would be an interesting problem to solve, maybe. If there's a problem with how it's running now.
Is that something you want to submit a PR on? Or is there direction on what would get approval?
I guess I need to actually look at the YAML as it is in master. It runs on pull requests and that's it.
I believe so.
Yeah.
And since it doesn't run when you push to main, the batch was looking at only the stuff that went to main, not on the pull request.
Sure, I can make a pull request. And we can argue with me instead of with some other contributor.
We get blocked in a whole different direction. Yeah. The one thing I worry about is just multiple runnings of the thing. So if we've got something like Dependabot throwing up some issues, having it run on the Dependabot branch, then on the pull request, then on the merge, I feel like we're getting a little bit repetitively redundant. All right. If anyone else has comments on that, feel free to stop me at any time here. There was some stuff about other layer media types, but I want to hold off on that in case Rom shows up late. So I'm not going to jump into that one just yet. But I did want to call out that the reference spec working group is getting some attention. So I wanted to make sure people were aware. Also make sure that people were aware you were getting volunteered for stuff. So there was a comment from Akihiro saying, hey, Containerd, Moby, BuildKit, all those things are going to be stakeholder projects that will agree to, participate in the implementation, do some validation work in their implementations. So raising some visibility for that. And if there are additional people that want to help run it, be stakeholder stuff like that, feel free to chime in. I don't think we have enough now to run with it, but just want to raise some visibility in general. Eric, I see you coming off mute, but I don't hear you saying anything.
Oh, yeah. For that one, I was curious on the scope on it. There's a bunch of stuff about including alternate layer formats, immutable tags, selecting artifact. Like, is there a it's adding a lot to the scope. I was just like wondering if there was more clarity on exactly how that's in scope.
There are use cases that I can think of. Doesn't necessarily mean we have to solve everything, but there are some challenges I can think that would be nice to solve if we can. And how much of that did I put in here? I put them all in there.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Yeah, what? I guess the word is what what would this, how would this be solving that?
Yeah.
Rather than just providing a simple reference string format.
I would say the key detail here is define how it can be extended. Doesn't necessarily mean we have to solve it. But for example, like with distribution right now, we defined how you can use the extensions in distribution with the underscore syntax over there. And I'm hoping that maybe we can plan a little bit ahead on this one, know that people are going to come up with some other use cases for how they want to use a reference and figure out if there's a way we can make that something easy enough to add. And if not, we don't.
Yeah, I guess that just worries me a little bit about trying to define a specific format for like switching between, or like having a bunch of like special case meaning for tags. And yeah, just putting that in scope kind of is the only thing that worried me, but doesn't, other than that, I mean, I think it should be something pretty simple. The biggest thing is that in here was that mentioned was about the that we ran into in Containerd was the export or the archive, what do you call the image archive tar
OCI image layout.
tags. Yeah, that was referenced. Yeah, I think that was the biggest thing we hit on Containerd, that we had to do something custom that should be sold.
That one's big to me, particularly if we want to specify more than just a tag within a layout. If we want to specify an entire repository.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we had to do in Containerd, because we need the full reference in the image layout. But we did in Moby and Containerd, basically.
And yeah, the field is allowed to have that, but is there maybe a particular syntax we could define that says, hey, if you see this string, instead of going to a container registry, you're
It was
talking to an
debatable
OCI
whether or
layout.
not that's like, yeah, it's not reliably that full value. So that's why we ended up having to like add something.
So did you make a new reference for that, or didn't make one at all?
We have our own annotation for the image layout for it,
Okay.
which we'll use that by default. Basically, if you just have this, then you can't just import an image. You have to like tell it what you're importing it as, so that it can create a full reference. Otherwise, so it's lost information. You export something, you re-import something. The way it is today is kind of throwing away some vital information that we need to recreate the image.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you're doing an import changes a little bit of how this is. Like, you're not saying run this image from this registry. You're saying import this image, and then you can run it using whatever the name is.
Yeah, you can certainly change the name of it. And as I said, like, you can import it as whatever you want. But for like the normal symmetrical export import, it does not work today.
Yeah, the direction I'm thinking of, looking at like how Scopio has some of their challenges, some of the other tools out there, which will accept any of these abstract things that's not necessarily just a container registry, but could be an OCI layout, could be a reference to a pull-through proxy, anything along those lines, and treats that just like it would a container image that's up on a registry.
I mean, you could, yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's what this reference group is supposed to solve, right? Is how do we handle these type of strings, and like, what does it mean if I export an image as something registry latest, and then I want to pull it as, or I want to put it somewhere else and pull it as something else, like that's fine. And I think that's where the string format could say, well, either you just say this version of the image is latest, or, you know, here was the original string, and if you just want the tag, you can. But an unsolved problem in OCI today, I think.
For example, Scopio has their Docker colon syntax.
Oh, if that's in scope to add that, then I'm very -1 to the group, to the working group.
I don't know necessarily that we would add that specific syntax, but the idea that they were going for with that was that registries are just one potential reference for an image.
Yeah, I've just
Yeah, I
left
mean,
a comment on the PR to this effect, but my own opinion is that if this is doing anything except describing the existing state, I'm -1 as well.
Existing state of whose implementation?
The canonical implementation that started this whole journey. The distribution
Yeah.
implementation that should have been part of the original distribution spec, frankly.
I asked that because myself, Scopio, I'm not sure who else might have gone that same path, have already gone down the path of extending the idea of what a reference could be.
And that was certainly a choice. And I would not say that it was a good one. It created ecosystem fragmentation.
In a way, yes, but in a way, it solves a lot of problems if you're trying to copy from A to B to not say, okay, here's a reference that's on a registry, here is all these other places that you can potentially get it. Now you got to pass all these other flags to extract it from this directory or pull it from this HTTP site or something like that.
I mean, that's yeah, that's a UX issue for specific tools. That's not necessarily like something that needs to be standardized as a reference. And in some cases, like they got it wrong, and it was like pretty ugly, like the whole OCI colon prefix.
I feel like even BuildKit has run into some of this on their side, haven't they? All right, still up for debate. But yeah, weigh in if there's a hard objection. This is right now, we haven't even voted to make the working group. We're just trying to see if there are enough people that want to try to be part of a working group. So to your concerns, Derek, Dianon, anybody else, plenty of time after we get enough people together to say, hey, we'd like to do this, to vote no, we're not going to create the working group, or we need to rescope this thing. Anything more on that one? You all good? All right. I'm going to skip over the mailing list spam stuff unless, well, Jory's still here. There is a bunch of spam that's over on the mailing list. I saw some comments over in the Slack on that one. Is there anything that can be done to maybe give people superpowers to go out and delete this stuff, or is there anything
Yeah.
more on your side?
Happy to certainly promote people to be able to moderate. Interesting that uptick in spam. I may ask to our IT department to help me look at the config as well, because I was pretty sure we had done some lockdown.
I mean, a lot of this has just been here forever. It just hasn't been
Right.
deleted.
Yeah. So Derek's saying moved over to other systems. So we have a separate, like there's sort of two different tools that projects use for mailing lists. OCI uses Google Groups, and then our other solution is a tool called Groups.io, which is actually integrated into the LFX platform. Google Groups is not. So I'm going to file a ticket and see if I can get some the IT folks to look at this with me, because I've certainly made some config changes, and clearly based on this, that's not quite doing it for us.
And it's the same person every time too.
Yeah, we can at least block that person. So let me
All right.
ironically, yesterday I spoke with somebody who's trying to start an anti-spam coalition, and I was like, yeah, let's do that.
I mean, if you feel like giving me permission to nuke spammers, I'm more than happy to
I'm
nuke
very
spammers.
happy to give you permissions to nuke spammers.
On the Groups.io, doesn't we still get a lot of spam as well? I'm not sure
Yeah,
if that's just a general problem today, but yeah, Google wasn't good about it, or the Google Groups wasn't good about it, but Groups.io doesn't seem much better in that regard.
I think it's I think what makes it maybe slightly different is just Groups.io has a far more limited set of permission structures, and Google Groups gives you a lot more expansiveness. And so I think it's potentially easier to make the wrong selections. But Yeah, I think the action is I need to get Johnson from our IT team to spend 20 minutes with me reviewing how we've set this up.
If you change it, that might be challenging because we've got this linked into charters and other things like that, I believe.
We want to give people who are real people with real like input the ability to join these lists if they're public. It's the people who are somehow able to join and post the spam, obviously, that we want to.
Yeah, my concern is mostly that if we do move it over to something like groups.io, we would have to go through charter changes for various groups.
Oh yeah, no, I should be clear. I'm not suggesting at this point that you all move to groups.io. That's not the problem. The
Okay.
problem is the spam. Yeah, not I wouldn't wish that on you if you were my worst enemy, a mailing list migration. So no, we're not gonna suggest
Okay.
that.
Or I was gonna say, do you hate groups.io that much?
Oh, I don't hate groups.io. I think that it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other, and that moving you to a different mailing list platform is not the answer. You've been on this for 10 years. Why in the world would you change? I mean, unless there was some real upside. I don't want to put a community through that. Mailing list, you change a tool, it's very hard for people.
Well, I don't know how many folks actually use like the groups Google directly. I feel like that's been a very neglected Google product anyways. Like I know it was actually better for us when we moved to groups.io on the containerd side because it was a little bit easier to manage and the Google permissions were kind of weird and no one was accessing the forms directly anyways.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's changed is with the integration of groups.io into the Linux Foundation's platform is that now if you are active, you can use the LF platform to manage your email preferences, and that's nice. I think you're making a great point that one never knows what a company might do with a product like was it Google Circles or whatever, like they don't always support those products. I just would leave it entirely up to you all if you wanted to migrate over to a different mailing list solution, which I'm happy to. I will gladly help you do that, but I don't really want to reinforce that. I don't want to force you to make any changes to your tooling.
There's nothing. Oh, yeah, I'm not proposing we do it. There's nothing in the, or is there, what do you see in the charter, Brandon, that is kind of talking about that? I mean, it mentions the mailing list, but it doesn't mention it as like links to the Google group or something.
I'm thinking for the voting process on some of the different charters, so I'd have to go double check, but that's my big concern is like, if we have to change governance, how much of a vote does that require? Can we get the vote to do a governance change?
Yeah, I don't think it's a governance change to like switch to. I'm not proposing we switch. I'm just saying I don't think it's a governance change if we move that.
If our governance calls out Google Groups explicitly, we should probably go through the pain of a governance change to get rid of that anyways.
It looks like they're just calling out the dev email address. So if that gets relayed forwarded, however it does that, we might be okay.
Yeah, I think the only like pain point there would be like if we wanted, I don't know, is the TOB one the one that's getting the spam? I didn't see that, but
It's Dev. Dev
okay.
is the one that's getting the
Yeah,
spam.
that one's
It's both.
hard because if you want to enforce users are like signed up through the like lists that groups.io or something, then I think you can be more aggressive about it. But yeah, that's kind of a lot to do to community.
Most of it's dev, but we do see it on TOB as well.
Yeah, the TOB you could close it down more, so you have to be on the system. I think most people have their Linux Foundation account set up.
I don't know how this guy got approved.
Well, I don't think there's any requirement to get on the group. You just say, I want to be on there, and you're automatically approved.
Yeah.
In fact,
Well, I'm
I don't
about to
think you
ban
need to
him.
be on there to send the message. You can just send the message and it just goes through.
I think that's correct.
Yeah.
We could maybe have it so that it moderates if you're not a member of the group, but then that's still a lot of work for people to actually moderate the list.
Sam, your microphone sounds terrible. But yeah, we could do that.
I've just blocked the more recent spammer. HIMA what, but I'm gonna Brandon, I'm gonna give you the ability to kick as well. And I might go through and do some pruning.
Thank you.
And then I'll talk to Johnson about configuration options.
I missed the beginning of this, but my assumption is moving to a different provider isn't going to change the spam problem.
I don't think it functionally does. I think you get spam is pervasive.
I would wonder how much we would get if the group was not visible to people that haven't joined the group. And the thought process there is that if you can't see it, it doesn't get indexed by Google, and then there's no value to spam in the group.
But that you can do that on Google Groups too. That doesn't require a provider change.
Correct. And so that's kind of my thought process, is rather than changing providers or anything like that, just making a switch so that you can anonymously come in here and pull this up and index it in the searches and whatnot. You actually have to go through and do a join, which you could take off all the moderation on the join, let people join instantly if you felt like doing that. And we wouldn't have any limits for folks who want to come in and check this out, other than you just have to have a Google account. I don't know if that breaks any public visibility requirements that we're supposed to have, but that one to me feels like an easy option.
I don't think we have a requirement for anonymous access in the charter.
Yeah, because right now anonymously, anybody can go in here and see us, which means search engines also, which means people that want to do this stuff look for those groups, I'm sure.
There's no reason we can't add, because if we want to, because we're very, very transparent and this is an open project, make the discussions that happen on dev publicly, viewable and archivable, that's great. There's no problem with us saying to join the list, you just have to kind of like identify. And I think that's, yeah.
Any Google account gets you in there to look at it.
Yeah.
And you're, viewing stuff. You can submit if you want to from outside. You don't have to submit from a Google address if you didn't want to, but yeah, feels like that might be an easy option there.
I just made your bmitch@gmail a moderator.
Sounds good. All right. Saeed, I don't want to take up too much time here. Do you want to jump in?
Sure, yeah. So, I added this agenda item for parallel pushing and pulling of the blobs. Right now, the only way you can upload and well, downloads you can probably do parallel, but the only way you can upload blobs is serially because you gotta calculate the checksum while the blob is being uploaded. Doesn't work for, I mean, it works for the most part, but right now we're seeing huge files like models and things like that being uploaded, and it's incredibly slow over a single connection. So my idea is to have some kind of a way to upload blobs in parallel. I'm thinking of like another media type, like a blob index almost. So instead of a single blob, it'll be pointing to a JSON or some kind of a index which has different, I guess, different sort of blob layers, so to speak, if that makes any sense. And each entry in that list would be a chunk of that blob.
I think we've done some discussion on this on 546, talking about out of order chunks.
So out of order chunks are hard because then you gotta reassemble them in the backend and then calculate checksum on it. So imagine like 100 gig file, right? So you push that file and it's going, let's say, through the registry, going into the backend storage. It gets assembled, and then you gotta calculate checksum on it. So you cannot commit a blob until you have calculated the checksum. So imagine how long it's going to take for a 100 gig file for the checksum to be calculated, right? Ideally, you want to send a response that a blob has been committed as soon as the final byte has been received by you. Maybe a little bit longer for, like, let's say you have some state you want to store, but shouldn't take like for a 100 gig file to do a checksum, it's going to take a few minutes. Right? I don't think that's the right approach.
I agree with you. I would say from where we're at with implementation, or like what we have today versus like where we want to go in the future, like I don't think we can just define something in this group to solve this problem. I think we need to have solutions first, and then figure it out in this group how we want to standardize it. And I think that's kind of some of yeah, there's a lot of folks who have been kind of looking into this problem and how we want to represent the chunk mapping, whether it's like something like DM Verity, where just a different way of computing the hash essentially is what we need. Some way to define the chunk size and the end hash. I think something like DM Verity probably makes the most sense here, but like, is that something we want to like add as the content hash? Possibly. But I don't think that's a decision, at least in this group, we can make right now. And we do not have a working group for this, but there is a lot of work going on, I would say.
So what would be the right place if this is not the group?
I mean, I think it's a group to discuss it, but I don't know if it's ready to make a decision point in this group. I guess this is the point. But
I think what Derek's saying is implement first, then standardize.
yeah, like we have the working groups, but the thing is, this is such a big like implementation focused problem that even if we were to have a working group, like we've been looking at this problem, Ram's been looking at this problem. Like my expectation is we're gonna have like multiple different implementations of this, and you know, some of them might, I don't know, I kind of feel like we need to have different implementations to figure out what's the best way to solve this. And we just need to make sure within OCI we're not getting in the way. So if you have like a specific implementation and you're like, hey, I have something, and it's, you know, this solves our problem, but like we're having a really hard time getting compatibility with registries because this specific language in OCI, you know, like registries are blocking my ability to use it, then I think that's where we can discuss it here.
Yeah.
But it's going to be hard. What you're proposing is going to be hard from the perspective of you will need client and registry side implementations of this.
Correct. Yeah, like anything we do for parallel blobs, upload or download, is gonna change both sides.
Download, I don't think so.
Download
In
is
fact,
probably, yeah, download
In fact,
is.
I would almost
download as
say,
well.
can we take download off this discussion? Because I think that's a distraction.
Well, okay. Instead of like thinking of it as like download, so I brought up the like I like the DM Verity format. I'm not proposing we use that, but like as an example of like you need to download something first. Like if you have a 100 gig file, you
Right.
cannot download 100 gigs of data before you can verify that the data's good. Because if you have 100 gigs of file, you probably don't even want to download all of it. It's probably the best bet in most cases. But even if you want to download it, you don't necessarily want to download it serially for sure, which you don't have to today. But even verifying it serially is expensive. So if you can pull that in chunks and verify them in chunks, DM Verity is a good example of like I can have a I forget what I guess it's a configurable ratio, but for a 100 gig file, you might have a 500 megabyte or maybe smaller chunk map, depending on how you do the chunk size.
Yep.
That you have to download first, and
Yep.
once you
In
have
that
that, you can
scenario-
download anything.
In that scenario, what change would OCI need to make to support what you're saying?
What I'm saying, or what Say it's saying.
I think the base of the idea is same. Like in what I'm proposing is essentially like a chunk map in DM Verity. So what I'm calling it is a blob index. So similar to how we have manifest indexes, right, or image index. So it points to multiple manifests. We can have like a blob index which points to multiple chunks of the same blob, each having their own SHA-256 and length and an offset into the actual blob. What needs to be changed? I mean, the spec needs to add an extra like media type, an extra object, I guess, like a chunked blob or something. Right now, the blob is just a SHA, but a blob could be just a hash, or like a chunk map. And then you can download individual chunks, and yeah, like what Derek was saying.
Yeah, so I guess it's I guess there's two ways to approach that. Like, you could, for example, put the chunk map into the blob, and you can specify like as an annotation or something, hey, there is a chunk map for this at this offset. But then there's another whole thing of like, do we even want the serialized hash of it at all? Like, should the hash actually represent something else completely? Like the fact that we have a digest, what does that digest actually mean? Is it this serialized digest, or it could be like in DM Verity, it's still a SHA-256. It's just that it's a 256 of the root of the hash tree. It's not a serialized hash of the whole data, because
Yeah, no,
at some point you don't even want the serialized hash of the data because that's just too much.
that is true. What I'm suggesting is the SHA-256 is going to be the SHA of the chunk map, not the full blob. It's literally like how you have image indexes. Like the SHA in an image index is the SHA of the manifest, not of the index itself, not of the manifests it contains, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Yeah. I guess
Yeah.
like there's two approaches you could take there. Like you could have in the layers, you could have two objects because the hash of the chunk map could still be a blob that you pull down, which
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
you're exactly right. That's what exactly I'm thinking. So a chunk map is just another blob in the registry, but you can have a media type which says chunk blob. Now the clients, instead of treating it as a tart or GZ, they can treat it as a chunk map, and then they can download the chunks in parallel.
I mean, I think that's, yeah, I think from the perspective of the hash of a descriptor, whether or not that hash, how that hash is computed could be based on the media type, which I guess that's a little tricky because you mentioned the manifest, but the manifest itself is still always at some, it's a stream of bytes, and the digest still represents the hash of that stream of bytes, even though it's not the hash of everything that goes into it.
So throwing a
Right.
question out here. If you're able to shard this into multiple chunks, why couldn't you shard into multiple blobs?
Yeah, that's the idea. I mean, oh, why don't you shard into multiple blobs?
We've got
Yeah,
that
that'd be a
ability supporting
really,
you
really
doing that
ugly
today.
manifest.
yeah.
I
So
mean, the manifest will get bigger, but if you don't make the manifest bigger, I don't see a way to do this without breaking any kind of backward compatibility. All the registries, all the clients have to be upgraded before any of this works.
I mean, they all have to be upgraded anyways if it's going to be a new format. Because the same thing is true here, that the things you're trying to pull are not tar GZs.
mhm.
Yeah, but we can push and pull stuff that's not tar GZs today to a registry. You don't have to upgrade the registry and have that upgraded.
You can, you just can't do it very well. I think that's the point.
I mean, we've got the concept of artifacts. We can push whatever we want to a registry. The thing we're looking at here is if we do this and you have something that the digest is in the blob and then the blob digest points to another blob chunk or something like that, you've got different APIs, you've got some kind of garbage collection logic on the registry. It needs to be modified to keep track of all these chunks and what the digest really refers to. You're potentially changing whether we've got a content addressable store based on the digest, the entire thing versus the digest, just an index.
Well, and that's kind of what I was getting at earlier. It's like, okay, say we stick with what we have today, in terms of like the hash, the digest is always the serialized digest of the object. That doesn't solve the blob upload issue. It does allow for much more efficient downloads, which maybe is good enough in most cases because, like, yeah, the models might take longer to upload, but you upload once, download 1,000 times. So it's like from that perspective, like doing the existing approach should still work. It's just always going to be much slower. And in theory, you shouldn't be moving these models around too much anyways, because they're so large, but in terms of like uploading them to like different registries. But
So downloads is not a problem because you can use range requests in HTTP to do parallel downloads. It's only the upload that's an issue.
well,
Because
it's a problem if you actually want to verify the content. If
yes,
you if you
I
if
mean,
you if you're going to YOLO the content and not
no, that's
actually check
true.
the hash,
So
then
the client will, regardless of how you download, will have to um, do the checksum calculation anyways, right? Unless you do per chunk checksum, which makes it a little bit faster, I guess. because then you can calculate parallel checksum in parallel on the client side.
So is
We've
your
got-
proposal here to support that on upload as well, that a registry could take in chunks out of order? And
Yes. So yeah, so the idea is to do both, right? So you should be able to upload in parallel, like for example, you can do that in S3. And you can also download things in parallel. And you only calculate checksums on the individual chunks themselves. So you don't calculate the full checksum both on the client and the registry. The assumption here is that if you verify all the chunks individually, the sum of them should also be verified.
I know, I think that's what Brandon's saying though, in terms of like, that's where we hit the backwards compatibility. Like if you want to propose something that's a big shift to what we're doing today, which we should consider that. Then that's one thing. Another is if you want to figure out a way to get what's working today done more efficiently. And that's they're kind of two different discussions, but if you change the hash, you break everything. I think that's Brandon's point.
Yeah, the path I would go, if you want to compute a digest on each chunk and only keep track of that digest, then make each chunk its own blob.
I wouldn't recommend
Don't.
that, but yeah.
Whatever size chunk you want to pick.
I mean,
Theoretically, you're able to do this as multiple chunks. Redefine what the
yeah.
blob is to be your chunk.
I guess, yeah, I mean, it's going to end up like that, I think. So, yeah, like each chunk would be, I guess, a blob.
And then each blob is just an entry inside of your manifest.
So this is where I think I'm kind of differing here. So can I share my screen?
Sure.
1 second. Share. Let's do that. Oh, I'm free trial. So, okay. Bear with me here. So let's say this is the manifest, right? So you have something like layers, and then in the layers you have like the first layer you have some digest, and then it points to a SHA-256 something, right? So in the regular use case, this would be a blob, and you can go to blob. So what I'm suggesting is something like this. So it'll point to a chunk index or a chunk map, whatever you want to call it. So this is a list of blobs. So this will have like 6, 1, whatever, and things like that. Keep going. And we can just like, I'm not fully certain on the format, but this is the idea. And these individual blobs are actual like blobs. So you can use the same OCI API to push and pull them. So like,
what problem is being solved if you have that extra bit of indirection in there of the chunk map that has the list?
right.
What problem is being solved by having that as a blob rather than that as a bunch of entries in the layers list?
So on the client side, this looks, you can pull this blob, and then the client can have logic to parse this and then pull all of these in parallel.
But the client already has logic today to pull all the layer list
in parallel. Yeah, I see your point. So your suggestion is just don't have this indirection, just chunk the file and then put them in layers with like some kind of annotation to describe what is the offset of that chunk.
Potentially.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you put them in the manifest, then they're already part of the pre-existing DAG that is the foundation of the structure, the data structure here.
Yeah, you don't break the entire spec if you move them up one layer. If you try to add this extra thing, you break the entire spec, which means that now you have to have a new concept for blobs. Registries need to modify the garbage collection. Everything
Yeah.
we've done has to be rewritten.
The only thing the reason is why I'm adding this is because this whole thing is a contained, like this whole thing represents a final blob, may it be a file or some AI model, whatever. It's like a singular thing. Like think of it this as an artifact, right?
Well, the
Um,
config in the manifest, I mean, that's just the layers, and we
correct.
don't have a good way to define what a layer actually is when we're not dealing with traditional layers. But I think it's safe to say that the layers represents the objects that are needed by that manifest, and the config itself should be the one that's defining how those layers actually get used and get put into whatever final object. So if you did have multiple layers that are intended to compile or be used as, say, one file, I think that would be something we want to try to represent in the config object. Like possibly like rethinking the way we do the rootfs in the config object rather than trying to redefine or adding another layer of indirection.
I mean, if it's an artifact that's not a traditional OCI image, you can put whatever you want in the config.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
But also to your point, Saeed, you can put in annotations as well. There's multiple options you can use to put that extra metadata you might want.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna stop my share. Okay, that's good discussion. What I'm getting is that it's hard to change the spec, rather use it in a different way.
Well, there's hey, I want to get this working and I want to change the world, and like there's a mix of both. I mean, as I said, like if you want to, I completely support what you're trying to achieve, and I'll say you're not the only one trying to do this, but yeah, I don't like hacky everything, but like figure out something that works well and figure out what
Yeah.
the cleanest solution is. And the registries can change. They're just going to change very, very slowly. Very slowly.
No, I agree with you, but I do think that this is a huge sort of a hole in OCI where as we move to OCI artifacts, people are gonna start comparing, hey, why am I getting like a 10x speed reduction when I'm uploading to an OCI registry versus I'm going to like S3, for example.
When you're going straight to S3, is that all going under one file name?
Yeah. So in S3 you can do multi-part upload, right? So S3 handles both on the client side and on the server side. So on the client side, they split the file into chunks, and on the server side, they do the reassembly. So S3 has that. So it's hard for me to convince people to go, hey, no, OCI is a better format because I'm always hitting this thing. Oh, it takes so long to upload.
How is the checksumming? You have a different chunk mapping you're using that you're uploading next to the data with S3?
No, so S3 natively doesn't do it's not a content addressable storage. S3 is just object storage, right? So they don't have this problem of I need to calculate checksum for everything I upload. So they kind of get away with that. because they're not like they don't guarantee content will be like checksummed.
I mean, you could still have an OCI registry that doesn't checksums as well.
Yeah, but that's not
but,
spec though, right?
Well, I mean, how you check the checksum is, I don't think we define, but you're not gonna find any registry that supports not checksumming the data, because that's what content addressable is.
Yeah. So I feel there should be some way of like improving the spec to make it more like competitive, essentially.
I don't disagree with you. I guess the point is more like, having an implementation, trying to get it work to propose what that change to the spec would be within our own parameters of, we do enforce content addressability, and I said that the chunk map and stuff would work, but there's no implementation, no adoption of such a chunk map to go and like well, maybe registries don't want to store your 100 gigabyte models, so maybe there's very little. Well, I guess maybe if you're paying for it, but like registries will support it if there's if they have a good reason to. And that's not a real algorithm.
ARC.
Yeah,
That's
not a digest.
It's not a SHA-256, that's for sure.
So 256, right? Like someone in Red Hat, they're saying like, oh, you should support SHA-512 by the end of this decade or whatever.
No,
That's
SHA-3 maybe, but SHA-512 is pointless.
So like it's going to increase if we do serial checksum, it's going to keep increasing like the time to do checksums. But we're almost out of time. Can I follow this up on the Slack, the open container Slack?
Yeah, I would say though, kind of just to echo what Derek's saying, is start with an implementation, and then spec follows the implementation, not the other way around. And so,
Gotcha.
We
I
are
think you're
working
gonna
on
find
this
it's
on
all-
Containerd, and Rom's working on some stuff as well. So it's you
Yeah.
can find some partners in here. I mean, good luck finding registry partners. but-
I'm the registry partner if you're looking for it.
Okay. Well, if you have something on the registry, we'll try to support it.
All right, I will ping you, Derek. Thank you for your time.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Any last minute requests before we get cut off? Going once, going twice. All right. Thanks, Saeed. Thanks, Derek. Thanks, everybody else. Thanks, Jory.
Bye.
Cheers, all.